Welcome the anointed ones. When a pack of wolves can't take down a lion, they eventually turn on each other. Family. Let's be brutally honest. Jealousy is one of the most ancient diseases of humanity, and history proves it's deadlier than any virus. Studies have shown that envy doesn't just sit in the mind. It eats away at the body like poison, literally raising stress hormones, weakening immunity, and even shortening lifespans. So when a jealous group of people plotted against you, they weren't just risking your downfall. They were signing up for their own slow, agonizing destruction. Now here's the suspenseful twist that should send shivers down their spines. While they thought they were orchestrating your collapse, heaven was meticulously documenting their every move, archiving their treachery. What they whispered in secret is being broadcast in the spirit realm, amplified for all to hear. What they threw at you in malice is bouncing back like a divine boomerang, returned to sender with celestial express delivery. And here's the wickedly humorous part. It's almost as if they mailed a poisoned letter addressed to you but forgot you reside in a fortress shielded by impenetrable divine firewalls. Now that toxic package is sitting on their own porch, ticking louder and louder, pulsating with karmic energy. This isn't ordinary karma, slow and meandering. This is divine justice in its rawest form, not petty revenge, not childish payback, but a spiritual balancing act so precise, so elegant that you don't even have to lift a finger. The very plot designed to bury you has become the undeniable evidence that elevates you and the true beauty of it all. You survived not by fighting dirty, not by stooping to their level, but by standing still, anchored in faith while the universe fought for you. Stay with me, because what I'm about to break down will shake you to your core. How the jealous crew that came together in wickedness are now hopelessly trapped in their own meticulously woven net. Why their alliance built on envy and deceit was doomed from the start. And how divine law is systematically exposing every hidden motive they so desperately thought would stay shrouded in the shadows. Get ready, because this isn't just about what they did to you. It's about what heaven is now relentlessly doing to them. Number 1, their plot was ironically the ultimate proof you were untouchable. The very fact that a whole group of people had to come together, pooling their resources and malice just to try and pull you down, is already irrefutable proof of how exceptionally untouchable you are. One person's jealousy wasn't enough. One person's slander couldn't penetrate your armor. One person's isolated attack was utterly insufficient. It took a collective, concerted effort. That alone speaks volumes, doesn't it? Think about it logically. If you were ordinary, if you were easily dismissed, it wouldn't require a committee. The undeniable reality is that the weight you carry spiritually, mentally, and even energetically is so profoundly intimidating that no single individual could handle the daunting assignment of trying to dim your radiant light. They had to gather like sniveling cowards in a dark corner, because deep down, one-on-one, they knew they would inevitably lose. This is what most people tragically fail to realize about spiritual warfare. The sheer size and scope of the attack always directly reveals the magnitude of the calling on your life. The moment you notice not just one but multiple people aligning themselves against you, it was unequivocal confirmation that you hold a level of significance that is breathtakingly rare. They couldn't simply ignore you. Your light was too bright, your presence too powerful. So they decided to band together in an attempt to extinguish your flame. And ironically, by doing that, they inadvertently exposed your true, indomitable power. Their desperate attempt to destroy you became an accidental, earth-shattering announcement that you are chosen, set apart, and inherently dangerous to the false, fragile systems they have desperately built their lives on. You didn't have to prove your strength. Their pathetic reaction definitively proved it for you. People don't plot against what they don't fear. Nobody gathers a whole group expending precious time and energy to stop someone who simply doesn't matter. Their jealousy wasn't triggered by your perceived weakness. It was triggered by the undeniable weight of your presence, the way you effortlessly shift atmospheres with your very being, and the way your mere existence challenges the suffocating mediocrity they've tragically settled for. Their desperate plotting was the clearest, most undeniable sign that your influence is far bigger, far more expansive than you even consciously realized. And here's the brutal truth they never expected to face. By joining forces, they didn't multiply their power. They only multiplied their exposure, amplified their vulnerability. The very need to unite against you is what ultimately revealed how inherently fragile they are, how precarious their foundations truly were. It showcased their desperation, their gnawing insecurities, and above all, their paralyzing fear. You became the mirror they couldn't bear to look at directly, so they childishly tried to break it. But instead of breaking you, their own meticulously planned plotting has irrevocably shattered their credibility, their inner peace, and soon their entire lives as they knew them. What was meant to be your ultimate downfall has become undeniable, irrefutable proof that you were never ordinary, never meant to blend in. And that is the agonizing part they will never ever recover from. Number 2, jealousy is fundamentally not about what you have, but about who you are. They didn't come together against you because of what you own or what you've achieved. If it were just about superficial things like money, status, or material success, they could have simply competed, copied your methods, or tried to superficially outdo you. That would have been the easier, less psychologically damaging route. But the unvarnished truth is their jealousy runs far, far deeper. It's about who you are at your core, the intrinsic essence you effortlessly carry, that radiant inner light that can't be manufactured, imitated, or purchased, no matter how much money they throw at it. And that's precisely why it torments them, why it keeps them up at night. There's something profoundly unsettling about a person who simply exists authentically and unapologetically and yet commands attention, respect, and admiration without even trying. You didn't beg for their validation. You didn't chase after their fleeting approval, and still your very presence speaks volumes, resonating with an undeniable power. That is what profoundly disturbed them, what gnawed at their carefully constructed facades. While they are constantly busy curating appearances, desperately masking their deep-seated insecurities and fighting tooth and nail for scraps of recognition, you stand as living, breathing proof that authenticity carries a power they can never truly touch, a freedom they can never genuinely experience. You are not threatening because of what you've done. You are threatening because of who you inherently are. That's the kind of soul-deep jealousy that cuts the deepest, leaving scars that never truly fade. They could possibly tolerate your wins, however grudgingly, if they came from manipulation and deceit like theirs. They could maybe handle your progress if it was built on compromise and moral flexibility like theirs. But the fact that you walk with an energy they can't reproduce, a kind of effortless grace they can't fake, and an unwavering resilience they can't borrow or steal, it drives them absolutely mad, consuming them from the inside out. They look at you and see a living, breathing standard they can never reach, no matter how desperately they try, no matter how many corners they cut. That's why the plotting wasn't optional for them. It was the only desperate way they felt they could level the playing field. The only way they could quiet the voices of inadequacy in their own heads. What they tragically failed to realize is that essence is inherently untouchable. They could try to strip away your opportunities, sabotage your progress, but they can never strip away your unique presence. They could try to poison your reputation with lies and slander, but they can't silence the way your spirit speaks volumes even before you open your mouth. They could gather in their pathetic jealousy, fueling their collective resentment, but jealousy has no genuine strategy. It only has desperation, a blind, all-consuming hunger. And desperation always exposes itself in time. Their obsessive preoccupation with you was never truly about envy of your possessions. It was their quiet, unspoken confession that they saw something profoundly valuable in you, something they desperately wished they possessed within themselves. Their plotting was nothing more than irrefutable proof that your very existence unsettles the counterfeit reality they desperately cling to. They weren't fighting against your external achievements. They were fighting against the soul-crushing reality that you can't be duplicated, that your unique essence is irreplaceable, and that's the haunting truth that will plague them the longest, echoing in the darkest corners of their minds. Number 3. They inadvertently created their own inescapable trap by naming you their enemy. The very moment they consciously decided you were their enemy, they unwittingly set themselves up for a cataclysmic downfall. People casually think choosing an enemy is harmless, a trivial decision, but spiritually it's one of the most dangerous, high-stakes decisions a person can possibly make. By specifically targeting you, they unknowingly tied themselves inextricably to your destiny. And that was their colossal, irreversible mistake. Obsession is never free. It always comes with severe consequences. The immense energy they poured into meticulously plotting against you wasn't just tragically wasted. It became a spiritual cord, a binding connection linking them directly to the very fate they desperately wanted to destroy. This is precisely where divine law, immutable and unwavering, comes powerfully into play. When someone declares war on a soul that's divinely protected, they cease walking their own intended path and start walking blindly, inexorably straight into their own carefully constructed judgment. They could have simply left you alone and lived relatively peacefully, focusing on their own lives, but instead they consciously chose to invest their time, their energy, their conversations, and even their closest relationships into actively conspiring against you. That constant, unwavering focus, that obsessive preoccupation inadvertently gave you a subtle but significant authority over their lives without you having to lift a single finger. Their ultimate downfall was sealed the very moment they designated you as the one to bring down, the one to dismantle. What they disastrously didn't realize is that every single plot, no matter how meticulously planned, needs explicit permission from a higher power in order to succeed. And in this particular case, heaven emphatically denied them that permission before they even truly began. By naming you as their sworn enemy, they weren't just fighting a person, they were foolishly fighting against the impenetrable divine covering that shielded your life. That is a battle they could never ever win. Instead of recognizing that their constant resistance only served to magnify your inherent protection, they stubbornly doubled down, making the inescapable tie between your ultimate victory and their devastating collapse even stronger, more undeniable. Now they are actively paying for their monumental hubris. Everything they desperately tried to build on the back of your name, fueled by their envy and resentment, is currently crumbling around them piece by agonizing piece. Every single conversation laced with malice, every whispered threat has morphed into irrefutable evidence against them, sealing their fate. They can't run from it. They can't hide. Because once they knowingly bound themselves to your divinely ordained destiny, your inevitable rise automatically became their public exposure, their unmasking. It's not because you deliberately wished it upon them, but because divine law simply doesn't bend for anyone regardless of their wealth or influence. When you consciously set yourself against a chosen one, a soul with a divine calling, you are no longer in control of your own life. Your impending downfall is essentially scripted by the very cosmic forces you so foolishly tried to challenge. So in the end, naming you their enemy wasn't an act of power, it was their unconscious surrender, their tacit admission of defeat. Without fully realizing it, they effectively handed their future over to the same divine order that's relentlessly elevating you. And now their judgment isn't just random chaos or bad luck. It is the perfectly natural, unavoidable consequence of a reckless, catastrophic choice they should have never ever made. Number 4. Divine justice operates on a completely different plane than human revenge, utterly transcending its limitations. Divine justice exists on a completely different level than human revenge. And that's what makes it so profoundly powerful, so deeply satisfying. When people inflict pain upon us, it's undeniably natural to want to see them experience that same pain, to witness their suffering. That's a fundamental human instinct deeply ingrained within our psyche. But God, the ultimate arbiter of justice, doesn't operate on that petty tit-for-tat level. He doesn't waste time with petty payback or vindictive measures, because his ultimate justice isn't about making someone cry for the fleeting satisfaction of entertainment. It's about restoring balance, setting things right on a cosmic scale, and demonstrably showing everyone that there is an overarching, immutable higher law that simply cannot be tampered with, cannot be corrupted. That's why your ultimate vindication doesn't and shouldn't come from you actively trying to get even, from you engaging in a vengeful pursuit. You don't have to lower yourself to their level, muddying your own hands to see tangible, undeniable results. Divine justice operates with surgical precision, unerring accuracy. It doesn't throw random, indiscriminate punishment around creating collateral damage. It goes directly to the very source of the wrongdoing, exposing the root of the problem, and flawlessly flips it back on them in a way that no human mind could have ever conceived or meticulously planned. Every single lie they maliciously told about you ultimately becomes the very thing that publicly reveals their deeply flawed character, stripping away their carefully constructed facades. Every curse they heartlessly sent your way ends up spiritually tying them up, binding them to the very darkness they attempted to inflict. And every elaborate plot they meticulously put together with the sole intention of trapping you has now become the exact inescapable place they're hopelessly stuck in, writhing in their own self-made prison. That's not a mere coincidence or random chance. That's surgical divine justice at its finest. The inherent beauty of divine justice is that it leaves no loose ends, ties up every single loose strand with perfect precision. When humans take revenge into their own hands, it usually creates more chaos, generates more bitterness, and perpetuates endless cycles of retaliation spiraling downwards. But when God actively steps in, intervening on your behalf, the cosmic balance is immaculately restored without you having to compromise your own integrity, without you having to sacrifice your own peace of mind. Your hands remain clean, untainted, while theirs are publicly exposed for what they truly are, their deepest flaws laid bare for all to see. That's precisely why when people witness your vindication, it carries such undeniable weight, such profound resonance. It doesn't look like petty drama or senseless conflict. It unmistakably looks like the unvarnished truth being gloriously unveiled, the darkness being unequivocally illuminated. And here's the part that will genuinely shake them to their very core, leaving them trembling with fear. Divine justice always flawlessly matches the seed that was originally planted. If they knowingly sowed seeds of lies and deceit, their devastating downfall will be public exposure, the unearthing of their deception. If they sowed seeds of betrayal and backstabbing, they'll inevitably be betrayed by their own inner circle, their own allies turning against them. If they sowed seeds of elaborate traps and carefully constructed schemes, they'll ultimately find themselves hopelessly ensnared in those very same traps, unable to escape. There's absolutely no randomness about it. What you deliberately send out into the universe is exactly what comes crashing back, amplified and intensified, landing squarely at your own doorstep. That's how God emphatically proves that He doesn't play favorites, showering blessings on some while withholding from others. He plays fair, holding everyone accountable to the same immutable laws. So no, you don't need to take any fleeting comfort in actively watching them suffer, deriving pleasure from their pain. You take lasting comfort in witnessing the unwavering precision of heaven as it systematically restores cosmic order while you continue to rise untouched and unburdened, soaring to new heights. Their devastating collapse isn't just random chaos or bad luck. It's irrefutable proof that divine law is actively alive and cannot under any circumstances be escaped, no matter how cleverly you try to evade it. Number 5. The group, in their desperate attempt to tear you down, inadvertently became a cage for themselves, an inescapable prison. They firmly believed that coming together against you, pooling their resources and their malice, would inherently make them stronger, giving them an insurmountable advantage. In their warped minds, superficial unity was the ultimate key to victory, the undeniable pathway to your destruction. They vehemently convinced themselves that if they spoke with one united voice, moved as one cohesive body, and meticulously planned their schemes in unwavering secrecy, they would undoubtedly overpower you, crushing your spirit and extinguishing your light. But unity rooted in wickedness, fueled by jealousy and lies, doesn't create genuine strength. It ultimately creates bondage, a suffocating confinement. By knowingly tying themselves together with cords of deep-seated jealousy and consuming hatred, they built a cage for themselves, a prison that none of them can now truly escape, no matter how desperately they try to break free. What they foolishly thought would be their safe space, their impenetrable power base, has inexorably become their prison, a living hell of their own creation. The unvarnished truth is that when people consciously gather for a cause rooted in lies fueled by destruction, their superficial unity is inherently fragile from the very start, riddled with cracks beneath the surface. It might look superficially powerful and intimidating on the outside, projecting an image of invincibility, but on the inside it's intrinsically toxic, poisoning their minds and corrupting their souls. Every single word they maliciously spoke against you carried heavy spiritual weight, and because they knowingly agreed to it as a collective group, they are now all undeniably bound by the same devastating judgment, shackled together. The same agreement they foolishly thought would protect them has instead chained them inextricably to each other's catastrophic downfall, sealing their collective fate. This is divine law actively at work, manifesting in its purest form. Unity is undeniably powerful, but it doesn't discriminate, doesn't selectively choose who it impacts. It magnifies whatever underlying energy it carries, amplifying its effects. When people consciously come together for good, driven by love and compassion, blessings multiply exponentially, enriching their lives. When people consciously come together for evil, driven by hatred and jealousy, destruction multiplies just as rapidly, devastating their lives. They unwittingly activated a profound spiritual principle without fully realizing its far-reaching consequences, and now they are hopelessly stuck in the inevitable consequences, unable to extricate themselves. None of them can pull away clean, severing their ties, because they willingly signed their names both figuratively and spiritually in agreement when they knowingly joined the malicious plot. What makes this situation even more brutally ironic is that the very same group they desperately leaned on for support and validation is the same group that will inevitably witness their public exposure, their humiliating downfall, unable to offer any real comfort. They cannot even genuinely comfort each other because deep-seated distrust has already insidiously crept in, eroding their fragile alliance. Each one is silently wondering who will be the first to crack under pressure, who will confess their sins, who will betray the rest in a desperate attempt to save themselves from utter ruin. The cage they meticulously built is tightening, relentlessly squeezing the life out of them, and their own twisted unity is slowly suffocating them, robbing them of their peace of mind. What was initially supposed to make them strong has instead become the very weight that inexorably drags them down together, plunging them into the depths of despair. And this is the ultimate irony of plotting against someone divinely protected, someone walking in their purpose. You don't just destroy yourself through your own malicious actions. You inevitably drag down everyone foolish and reckless enough to consciously join you in your destructive endeavor. Their alliance wasn't a source of legitimate power. It was a spiritual trap meticulously disguised as friendship, a deceptive illusion. And now they are hopelessly locked inside it with absolutely no escape. Number 6. You were not supposed to fight back engaging in petty squabbles. You were specifically meant to witness, to observe the unfolding events with unwavering faith. One of the hardest, most crucial lessons for a chosen one to learn to truly internalize is that not every single battle is inherently theirs to actively fight. When people consciously come against you with lies, deliberate betrayal, and carefully constructed schemes, everything in your human nature, your innate instincts understandably wants to rise up and defend yourself, to clap back with equal force, or to publicly expose them for their treachery. That instinctive urge is entirely normal, entirely understandable. But it's not always divinely guided. It's not always the path you are meant to take. The unvarnished truth is that this particular plot, this calculated attack, was never inherently meant for you to personally handle. It was specifically meant to reveal for all to see how heaven actively fights for its own, how divine protection manifests in tangible ways. Your designated role wasn't to swing back engaging in a tit-for-tat exchange. It was to consciously stand back, firmly anchored in faith, and bear witness to the unfolding events. This is where many people tragically get it wrong, misinterpreting the signs. They erroneously think silence inherently means weakness and admission of guilt. They mistakenly assume you didn't consciously respond because you were secretly scared, profoundly unsure, or caught completely off guard, paralyzed by their attack. What they will likely never truly understand, never fully grasp, is that your strategic silence was a deliberate, conscious strategy operating on a level far higher, far more sophisticated than anything they could ever hope to comprehend. By consciously refusing to retaliate, by choosing to remain silent, you weren't giving up the fight or admitting defeat. You were consciously handing it over to a cosmic court far more powerful, far more just than any human hands could ever be. You were essentially saying, through your deliberate actions, this particular situation, this injustice, inherently belongs to God. I trust in His divine plan. And when heaven actively takes a case intervening on your behalf, the ultimate outcome is never truly in doubt. The scales of justice are always perfectly balanced. Your conscious lack of response, your unwavering silence, inadvertently became the loudest, most powerful response of all, echoing throughout the spiritual realm. While they were maliciously plotting, speaking louder and louder in their conspiracy, you were deliberately making ample room for divine justice to actively work, operating with surgical precision, dismantling their plans piece by piece. If you had impulsively tried to handle it yourself, engaging in a human-level conflict, the battle would have inevitably remained confined to that level, limited in its scope and impact. But because you consciously chose not to engage, choosing instead to remain silent and trust in divine intervention, heaven was entirely free to move it to a higher, more impactful spiritual level where the ultimate punishment is exact, completely unavoidable, and utterly undeniable. That's precisely why their devastating collapse isn't random or accidental. It's perfectly aligned with every single seed they maliciously sowed, a direct consequence of their choices. And here's the deeper truth, the profound revelation: chosen ones don't inherently win by out-arguing or out-scheming their enemies. They ultimately win by consciously outlasting them, by remaining steadfast in their faith. You consciously gave God permission to demonstrably prove what true silence really means, its inherent power. It's not fear as they mistakenly believe. It's inherent authority, a quiet confidence. Only someone who is truly confident in their divine covering, in their impenetrable protection, can consciously stand still while being vehemently attacked, while being falsely accused. Your conscious silence, your deliberate inaction, was your way of silently saying, "I know who I am, and I undeniably know who actively defends me. I have unwavering faith in his plan. So no, you weren't inherently supposed to fight back, engaging in a petty back and forth. You were specifically supposed to watch, to bear witness to how the very schemes they maliciously designed against you ultimately collapse on their own heads, crushing them under their weight. And now, as their carefully crafted words backfire spectacularly, their meticulously woven lies unravel before their very eyes, and their superficial unity dissolves into bitter infighting, you stand as living, breathing proof that divine justice only truly needs your patience, your unwavering faith, not your frantic retaliation. Your conscious stillness was the sharpest, most effective weapon in the entire room, silently dismantling their plots. Number 7. Their consuming envy was in reality an unspoken, deeply buried admiration, a grudging recognition of your inherent worth. Envy often cunningly disguises itself as consuming hate, masking its true nature, but at its very root, it's really an unspoken, carefully concealed admiration, a silent acknowledgement of your inherent value. The ones who consciously plotted against you, spending countless hours consumed by their scheming, weren't just filled with irrational malice for no legitimate reason. They were confessing in a twisted, distorted way that you inherently carried something they desperately wanted but could never genuinely become, no matter how hard they tried. Every single insult, every fabricated rumor, every conscious attempt to tear you down was really them silently saying, "You undeniably possess something I'll never truly have, a light I can never genuinely replicate." They didn't hate you because you were weak or easily dismissed. They hated you because you inherently embodied a strength, a resilience they simply couldn't fake, a quality they couldn't acquire through manipulation or deceit. That's the cruel irony of consuming jealousy. It's essentially a backhanded compliment, a silent acknowledgement of your superiority. They diligently studied you closely, hoping to painstakingly find flaws big enough to diminish your radiant shine, to lessen your impact. But instead of finding inherent flaws, all they kept finding were admirable qualities that only served to expose their own deep-seated lack, their own perceived inadequacies. Your inherent resilience, your unwavering ability to bounce back from adversity made them feel inherently fragile, easily broken. Your unwavering authenticity, your genuine nature, made them feel inherently fake, exposed for their superficiality. Your innate ability to walk purposefully in your designated path without desperately begging for hollow applause made them feel inherently small, insignificant. So rather than consciously admitting that they secretly admired you, acknowledging your inherent worth, they consciously chose the easier, albeit more destructive route to actively attack what they could never genuinely reach, to tear down what they could never authentically build themselves. The problem with unspoken admiration left unchecked and allowed to fester is that it inevitably rots, poisoning the mind and corrupting the soul. What could have been a source of genuine inspiration for them, motivating them to improve themselves, instead became a dangerous obsession consuming their thoughts. They could have consciously learned from you, sought your guidance, even genuinely respected you for your inherent qualities, but consuming envy simply doesn't inherently allow that. Envy insatiably demands destruction. It thrives on tearing down what it can't build up. It doesn't inherently want to rise to your level, aspiring to greatness. It desperately wants to drag you down to theirs, wallowing in mediocrity. That's precisely why they plotted in shadows, shrouded in secrecy, engaging in deceitful schemes. Because secretly, deep down, they inherently acknowledged your superiority, the undeniable weight of your presence, but didn't want to consciously face it in the open, admitting their own perceived lack. What they disastrously didn't realize is that their consuming jealousy inherently exposed them far more than it ever inherently exposed you, revealing their own insecurities. People can instinctively see through the carefully constructed mask of consuming hatred. They can sense the underlying truth. When someone consciously spends an excessive amount of time speaking negatively against you, actively trying to tear you down, it inherently becomes clear that you occupy a significant space in their mind, a space they desperately wish you didn't inhabit. You inadvertently became the measuring stick they constantly compared themselves to, the standard they could never authentically touch, the unattainable ideal. Their every conscious attack, their every deliberate act of sabotage was essentially an accidental confession that you were the one they simply couldn't stop thinking about, the one who haunted their thoughts. In the end, their consuming envy wasn't really about consciously destroying you, eradicating your existence. It was fundamentally about the deep-seated agony of inherently knowing you carried something they longed for but could never genuinely embody, an inherent quality they could never authentically replicate. And that's precisely why karma will ultimately feel heavier on them, crushing them with its weight. Because beneath all their meticulously planned plotting, shrouded in lies and deceit, they inherently knew the unvarnished truth: you were inherently above them, and no amount of consuming hate could ever genuinely erase that fundamental truth. Number 8. They consciously mistook inherent darkness for strategic brilliance, falsely believing their actions were justified. They consciously thought they were being inherently clever, outsmarting everyone with their cunning plans. They stubbornly believed that consciously moving in silence, meticulously plotting behind closed doors, and carefully keeping their twisted schemes hidden would inherently give them the upper hand, guaranteeing their success. To them, calculated secrecy inherently felt like legitimate power, a source of unwavering strength. But what they disastrously didn't inherently understand is that darkness is fundamentally not a legitimate strategy. It's inherently just a temporary delay of inevitable exposure, a fleeting illusion. When the designated target of your carefully constructed schemes is someone inherently protected by divine light, someone shielded from harm hiding in the shadows doesn't inherently protect you from the consequences. It only inherently ensures that when you are eventually exposed, the revelation will be louder, clearer, and far more humiliating, amplified for all to witness. This is one of the oldest, most immutable spiritual laws resonating throughout the cosmos. What is deliberately whispered in the darkness, shrouded in secrecy, will inevitably echo loudly in the open, reverberating for all to hear. They consciously mistook their temporary invisibility, their ability to operate undetected, as legitimate success, falsely believing they were getting away with their actions. But heaven was meticulously recording every single detail, archiving their insidious actions, their secret meetings, their carefully chosen words, their deliberately fake smiles, their subtle betrayals. Nothing escaped the watchful eyes of divine order. None of it slipped past the all-seeing eyes of divine order, remaining unnoticed. The very thing they consciously thought made them inherently safe, shielding them from accountability, was the very thing that inherently made their devastating downfall inevitable, sealing their tragic fate, because inherent light and inherent darkness simply don't coexist peacefully for long. They are fundamentally incompatible. When inherent light inevitably shows up, illuminating the darkness is inherently forced to flee. Retreating into the shadows, and exposure ultimately becomes completely unavoidable, utterly inescapable. The inherent arrogance in their twisted thinking is what ultimately sealed their tragic fate, guaranteeing their devastating downfall. They erroneously assumed that if nobody knew what they were consciously doing, carefully plotting in secret, the damage would inherently stick, permanently tarnishing your reputation, and they could easily escape accountability for their insidious actions. But conscious secrecy doesn't inherently equal sustainable safety. It inherently equals storage, a temporary holding pattern. All they consciously did was meticulously store up divine judgment, carefully accumulating the consequences of their actions, which would inevitably pour out at the designated right time, an unavoidable deluge. And when divine judgment inevitably comes unleashed in its full force, it never arrives quietly, subtly fading into the background. It inevitably comes in broad daylight for all to witness, when there's absolutely no room left for fabricated excuses or desperate cover-ups, when their lies are laid bare. Now the very whispers they consciously thought were inherently safe, remaining undetected, are inadvertently becoming their loudest testimony, damning them in the eyes of the world. The carefully crafted lies they meticulously crafted in the inherent shadows are inevitably circling back, relentlessly haunting them, but this time as undeniable evidence, sealing their fate. The carefully constructed strategies they consciously thought were inherently clever are inevitably unraveling into public embarrassment, exposing their deceit to the masses, and the more desperately they try to consciously hide, clinging to secrecy, the more glaringly obvious their inherent guilt becomes, the more they inadvertently incriminate themselves. That's the inherent curse of consciously moving in the inherent darkness, shrouded in secrecy. It inherently gives you a false, fleeting sense of control, a deceptive illusion, until the inherent light inevitably arrives, piercing the darkness, and then it relentlessly exposes every single crack you desperately tried to cover up, revealing the inherent truth. So their carefully planned strategy wasn't inherently a legitimate strategy at all. It was inherent arrogance meticulously dressed up as wisdom, a dangerous facade. And because they deliberately dared to consciously use inherent darkness against a child of inherent light, a soul divinely protected exposure wasn't just inherently possible. It was irrevocably guaranteed, etched in the fabric of reality. Their meticulously guarded secret has irrevocably become their damning sentence. And now what they consciously thought nobody would inherently ever know is the very thing that everyone is openly talking about, scrutinizing their actions. Number 9. The weight of their conscious actions. Their deliberate choices inevitably becomes generational, extending far beyond their own individual lives. The inherent seriousness of what they consciously did, the weight of their deliberate actions inevitably goes far beyond their own fleeting lives, impacting future generations. When someone deliberately rises up against a person divinely protected, a soul walking in their purpose, they aren't just consciously gambling with their own present existence. They are consciously gambling with the entire trajectory of their own bloodline, jeopardizing their legacy. That's the inherent weight of immutable spiritual law, its far-reaching consequences. It doesn't just consciously measure the individual's actions, it meticulously measures the ripple effect, the cascading impact on those connected to them. Their conscious actions weren't just inherently isolated events confined to a specific moment in time. They deliberately carried seeds, planting the seeds of karma. And seeds, whether inherently good or inherently bad, don't inherently stop at one single harvest. They consistently keep multiplying, bearing fruit long after the original planter is inherently gone, reaping the rewards of their choices. This is precisely why divine justice inherently feels heavier when it touches those who consciously plotted against you, the magnitude of their errors. Their deliberate choices weren't just inherently about fleeting gossip, fabricated lies, or conscious betrayal. They knowingly tampered with a life that was inherently chosen and divinely protected, violating a sacred boundary. And when someone consciously violates divine covering, acting with malice, the inherent consequences don't just bounce back on them, directly impacting their own lives. They reverberate throughout their lineage. So to wrap it all up, remember this: when jealousy rears its ugly head and people try to tear you down, it's ultimately a twisted sign that you're shining brightly. Their actions reveal more about their insecurities than they ever could about your worth. Trust in the divine orchestration of justice, stand firm in your faith, and know that you are protected. Their attempts to diminish you will only serve to elevate you. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Have you experienced anything similar? What resonated with you the most? Leave a comment below. Ask any questions you have and let's start a conversation. And if this message resonated with you and you want to hear more empowering insights like this, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos. Stay blessed, stay strong, and keep shining your light. Shining your light. Shining your light, shining your light, shining your light, shining your light.